give me one shot here on a blue chip stock, believe me, Kevin, the only problem you're gonna have is that you didn't buy more.
Nobody knows if the stock is gonna go up, down, sideways, or in circles.
What's going on, NBA draft fans? Your boys are back. The Wolves of Ball Street, your favorite draft analysts, It is the No Ceilings NBA draft show on the No Ceilings NBA podcast feed. My name is Corey Teleba. I'm here, as always, with my co-host, Albert Garbage Time Gim. Albert, what's going on, man?
It's great to be back. Corey and I spent a lot of time together in person in the last week, which is strange for us because usually we're literally on opposite ends of the country. But excited to be here. We have a lot to cover today. So much has happened, so much to talk about. I'm going to recap some of the stuff that we experienced in Portland. Got to talk about some draft prospects. Lots going on, but it's great, man. Life is great. Lots to talk about. Great time.
Life is great. I mean, yeah, we'll get into the Portland stuff. I think we'll close with that. But you'll get a peek behind the curtain because we're putting out the Hoop Summit vlog from the week that we had together, where Rucker and Metcalf and Albert and I, all our shenanigans from the week. So that'll be fun. Something new for our YouTube channel. But to start it off, before we break down some of the guys who we watched in Portland, we thought, and we were going to record this last week, but one of the shenanigans that happened in Portland is the No Ceilings crew could not figure out how to use our microphones together in the same room. We need a producer, I guess.
Noobs.
Yeah, it was a disaster, but we're going to do it today. We're going to do an episode where we break down our all NBA draft teams. So, the NBA season has come to an end. We got play-in games going on. Playoffs are about to start. All NBA teams are going to start dropping, right? Everybody's giving their all NBA teams. We figured draft-centric show. Let's do our all NBA draft teams. And then we're also going to do a 6th Man of the Year award, a Defensive Player of the Year, and a Most Improved Player of the Year award. All draft prospects, not, like who was the best 6th man in college basketball or anything like that. All draft centric. So, Albert, where do we start with this? Because this was your idea, which is a good idea, an idea that I enjoy.
It's hilarious that it was my idea, and yet I had trouble completing the task, just because I was like, well, what does this even mean to have an all draft first and second team? What are the qualifications? Is it simply based off of performance? Is it some sort of amalgamation of performance plus buzz plus stature plus draft ranking? It was all over the place, and it took me a really, really long time to fill out my first and second teams. But Corey, I figured what we can do is we can go, we can both share our first teams and then kind of talk about, where we kind of matched, where we didn't match, and some of our reasoning behind, the choices that we made.
I think that's a great way to do it. And I feel like, if you listen to any podcasts out there, it also seems like most people don't have a clear understanding of how they get to their all NBA team. So it seems fitting that we don't know exactly how we're getting to our all NBA draft teams. But I feel like it's also kind of a representation in a roundabout way of where we stand with, kind of like not necessarily the top 10, but, maybe like the lottery section of our big boards as well. Which I think if you did this exercise with, different people on our team, their first team all draft would look probably significantly different than ours. If you threw this exercise out to the internet, it would probably, everyone would give a whole bunch of different answers. And I think that's pretty cool. I think that's a pretty interesting result of the way that this draft has been playing out. So, all right, let's do our first teams. We did it as 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a big. So that's how we did our teams. We tried to keep it looking like a basketball team and not positionless, but we don't have set standards on who's what position. So maybe there will be something crazy. I don't know. Not from my end necessarily. So Albert, who are your first team all NBA draft 5?
So I cheated, Corey. Let's start
Okay.
there.
Sure.
I cheated. I tried.
I don't
my
even know how you
best.
could cheat on this.
So the reason why I'm saying I cheated was because I actually didn't do 2 guards, 2 forwards, and a center.
Okay.
I did some weird, like I looked at it almost as like the NBA first and second teams right now, where they're kind of going, position fluid or whatever.
Yeah.
I tried my best to keep it kind of tight, but my end result was not great. But I'll read you my first team. So at center, I have the monster from up north, Zack Edey of Purdue.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I know. And we'll get into why later. At forward, I got 2 forwards. I have Alexander Sarr from the Perth Wildcats. My other forward, Dalton Connect from Tennessee. Now, this is where I cheated. One of my guards, I have Zachary Risacher. Yep. And then my other guard, I have Stephon Castle from UConn. So a very strange team. And obviously we'll get into why I chose these guys. But I'm also so excited to hear your team, Corey, because I imagine it's very different from mine. But yeah, that's my first team.
My team is very different. To answer Jake Rossman in the chat, who asks, is Sarr a big or a forward? In this exercise, he's going to be both. So, but I think we have leeway for position fluency. That still represents a basketball team.
Sure.
You didn't just put your best 5 guys as your first team all draft. So so you had Castle, Risacher, Dalton Connect,
yep,
Alex Sarr, and Zack Edey.
That's correct.
We are only going to have 1 player
Nice
on our first teams that are the same. Do you want to guess which player that is?
I'm going to guess that it's Alex Sarr.
It is not.
Oh, Castle.
It is not.
Oh, all right, give up.
Yeah. So it's Dalton Connect.
Okay.
So before we get into my team, Dalton Connect, what about him drew you to your first team?
So when it came to Connect, my biggest thing with him was it was a mix of things, right? Heading into the season, he was a guy that was not like a heralded prospect. A lot of people weren't even super aware of him. But, he made the big move from the Big Sky to the SEC, and he had an unbelievable season offensively, shot the ball so well, flashed a ton of athleticism, was the number 1 option on a Tennessee team that, in the preseason, Corey, you and I talked about how we were not sure how that roster was going to turn out and how playing time was going to kind of figure itself out. And yet Connect kind of grabbed the reins by his hands and was like, this is my team. I am the captain now type of situation, and had an unbelievable season. And so it was a mix of things where I loved the season that he had, but also wanted to kind of acknowledge the rise that he had, across, big boards, and where he is now, where he could, potentially go in the lottery. So it was a mix of things for putting Connect in my top 5 or my first team.
Yeah. I feel like he had to be there if you're building out a team. I mean, I guess he didn't have to be here. I guess a lot of people probably would make the argument for a Ron Holland, maybe a Modest Buzelis, somebody like that, maybe a Cody Williams in your forward spots. But I mean, the guy averaged like 25 points per game in SEC play. He was an absolute monster in the tournament. I mean, how many points did he have against Purdue? Like
39,
something crazy like that. Like, he's a guy that I think, like, he's a little older. I understand history of that, but this is a guy who has, a unique developmental path, given the fact that, played in junior college and then low major and or mid major, and then now went to the SEC and absolutely dominated it, and college basketball also got older with him. So it's not as if, he was so advantaged because of his age, but I think that the skills that he does have are translatable to the NBA too. So this is why I think teams are kind of buying in on Dalton as a guy who could potentially go in the top 10. And, that's really rare for 23-year-old, but I think it speaks to the skill set that he has. I think that, he definitely needs to work on his handle. If he's going to be a guy who you want to carry even more of an offensive load, but that's pretty far away if he even ever gets there. But the fact that he can shoot off movement, run out in transition, catch and shoot with a quick trigger, he can go over either shoulder when he's coming off in the little mid-range area. And I think that he's capable of running ball screens. I think, he's got that little snake, get the guy on his hip, get to the elbow and pull up. And he's tall enough and he's got a high enough release that, he can get that shot off pretty effortlessly. So I think that, he's just a really solid NBA player. And for me, a guy that with that kind of skill set and somebody who I believe is actually going to develop as a guy who can leverage his scoring to make plays for people, not as like a high usage playmaker. But I think that, when you think of like running handoff actions with, big men who can operate as like a passing hub and those quick kind of pitch, come off like a ball screen, hit the roller, and that opens up either the roll to the rim or like short roll opportunities. And I think it's really just going to open up the offense and put guys in scramble mode. So big fan of Dalton Connect. He was the only guy for me that overlapped, though, on that first team. I do have a couple other guys that you mentioned on, we'll discuss today on my other teams. But I'm interested to know why you went Zack Edey on your first team.
Okay. So for my all draft team, it was a thing where I wanted to acknowledge and I wanted to give flowers to the unbelievably productive career that Zack Edey had in college. I thought, and just looking at his numbers this past season, 25 and 12, BPM of 16.8, was second in the nation in rebounds, right? Was unbelievable. A guy who throughout his college career has improved on his body, worked on his body, worked on his defense, stayed really productive. Even in the championship game, I know UConn was kind of like, hey, Edey, we'll let you kind of do your thing. Well, he still did his thing and had over 30 points, played a really, really good game. It's unfortunate, his teammates couldn't, make up for the rest. But just, considering that, and then on top of the fact that he's really pushed himself into the draft discussion, heading into the season, his draft stock was kind of all over the place. People had him in the, their 60s or 50s and 40s and stuff. And now I think there's a very real world where Edey goes maybe middle of the first round, and a guy who was just like, there are clear question marks with his game, clear question marks about how things will translate to the NBA level. But ultimately, that type of production makes you pretty optimistic about what he can do on the next level as well. And so just wanting to acknowledge the season that he had, wanting to acknowledge his growth as a prospect and the fact that he probably will go first round. And yeah, I just thought, and all the attention he got this year, playing for Purdue as well. I thought that was important. The bright lights were on him. All the attention was on him, and he continued to deliver and had a great season. So those were all the different parts that went into him being first team for me.
Yeah, and he stepped up, and you talk about that pressure. Like, they had a couple early flame outs in the tournament, so he kind of broke through that as well. And he was probably my toughest omission, just because he is like very much so a big, there's no way to wiggle room around that. I mean, I guess I could have got him on if I had put Sarr as a forward. I just wasn't thinking that way, even though I probably should have. And I'm probably the highest. I think I'm the highest on him if you look at our boards amongst the no ceilings guys. So I'm a huge Edey fan. I thought the defense was really, really impressive. I know he had some moments where, he was putting the ball screen and, you saw some of the mobility stuff in the UConn game, especially when Klingon was out and they went to Samson Johnson and, gave up a couple of alley-oops. But
yeah,
overall, the load that he carried defensively, the way that he altered guys, even from attempting shots at the rim, not even just, like guys Nash dribbling out of the paint.
Right.
I thought he was really, really great. And then he had awesome moments, against in that Tennessee game defensively, especially when he was, approaching it in a really like aggressive manner and going after shots to block instead of kind of trying to stay out of foul trouble and whatnot. So I thought he stepped up big time. Obviously, you mentioned big time game, even though that was part of the game plan in the national championship game. That UConn team is just, one of the greatest teams of all time. So like, no shame in that. So very interesting though. I'm glad that you brought Edey to the table because I was really, eager to discuss him. Because we did our episode before the tournament, I think, on Edey. So like,
yes, we did.
So and I think he really helped his stock there to where I think now there's a real shot he goes in the lottery. Yeah. Especially with how this draft is looking. But obviously we're far away from the draft, 2 months. We got workout season. Guys are going to look athletic in a gym and they're going to look like they know how to shoot, but maybe we'll see Edey shooting in an open gym. That'd be something. That'd be something. All right. So you had Edey, you had Sarr, you had Connect, you had Castle, and who was your fifth?
Risacher.
And Risacher. Interesting. So let's talk about Risacher. He did not make either one of my teams either.
So really quickly, Corey, let me get into why. So my biggest thing with Risacher was draft boards. He's been at the top of draft boards for a big chunk of the season. I think ESPN still has him at number 1. That was correct. That was a huge part of why I put him on my first team. Now, once again, like this was such a weird, like the line of reasoning and logic behind my teams was really strange. And so my biggest reason for putting Risacher on my first team or on either team was not even because of his play. He had a hot start early on in the season, and he's really, really tailed off. Only averaging like 9 points a game. I think he's playing like 21 minutes a game. The shooting has come down a lot. But I still wanted to put him on my first team because of where he's been on draft boards throughout the season. Once again, it's not even like a product of his play, but more of just like what people are seeing. And this being like a draft centric board, I was like, well, if people are still mocking him at 1, I feel like he still deserves to be in the conversation, was my logic behind putting him there. If I was doing it based solely off of play, I probably would not have had. I mean, I would have had different guys in that spot, but because of the buzz, I wanted to keep him there.
No, I actually really enjoy how you're approaching your board, because I think your board is pretty representative of like the stock of these prospects, and the seasons that they had. I mean, Risacher has been I don't know if he's a tough eval for me, because I feel like I've always been pretty weary of him, even as I was moving him up my board. Just because, like last year, seeing him in person, I was very underwhelmed. I know a lot of other scouts were. I thought he had a lot of underwhelming moments in FIBA, and then all of a sudden he comes out this season and he's lighting the net on fire, and you're like, how long can somebody keep this up, right? Like, we kept asking that question about Reed too, and he actually did it. So at a certain point, it was like, well, maybe he's just going to keep it up. And if he's going to be 6'9" flamethrower like that, who can, shoot off movement a little bit, and he can really defend, I don't think there's any questions about that. Obviously we can question, his ability to put the ball on the deck and create his own shot. I do think there could be some connective passing stuff to him. I don't think, he's a lost cause on that end by any means. But the free throw percentage always scared me a little, and again, like sometimes there's a correlation, sometimes there's not. But when you're on that much of a heater, but you can't shoot free throws, I'm just going to be a little nervous that it's not sustainable. And, like if the 3-point shot isn't going in, that's what is kind of scary, because he just doesn't have a ton else to his game. So he's always scared me as a guy that you look at the top of the draft, because so much hinges on him becoming a good shooter. Now, when he gets into the NBA, he's going to be, tailor-made for that role, and that's how I think teams are going to approach his development, right? So I think that ultimately the shot will come around, and at worst he'll be adequate, right? Like he'll be pretty good. And I just think, like, I've always thought, like, I don't know, like, is his upside like Keegan Murray? And like, that's a great like, if you can be that player, that's super valuable, but like, is that his best case scenario? Like, and how many players reach their best case scenario is the thing. So again, like that in this draft, if you can get Keegan Murray at the top, that's great. And I think, obviously he's still on some publications, he's still being viewed as a guy that, they expect teams to take towards the top of that draft. So I think it makes sense that, he would be on one of these teams. He was another guy that was somebody that I was really weighing heavily for my last spot. And ultimately I decided against it. But I mean, there's no real reason why I can argue against you having him there, right? Like, so yeah, I mean, tough one, this draft class, right?
And really quickly, Corey, just your point about him potentially even being a Keegan, like, it's such a hard one just because Keegan was so damn good in his last year in college. And, to be fair to Risacher, we're kind of going off of this one season. And a little bit
Keegan was older.
Before that. Yeah, Keegan was older, but just, I don't know. I don't know. Once again, like, my rationale for having him here was not even because of his play. It really is just because of the potential / where everyone else has him right now, that buzz. And that was like a big factor on both my teams, like that buzz factor, wanting to keep guys that have a lot of buzz towards the top of the draft on both teams, because I think it makes sense. But overall, I'm kind of right there with you. Even when we did our pod on him, Corey, like, we were like, hey, he's playing really, really well, but we might have some questions. This may not be what it is all the way through. And so to see how he's closing out his season right now and the way things have been going, pretty rough watch. So, yeah.
Pretty rough, but if he ends up in the right situation and the right team and the right spot, he could theoretically bring a lot of the stuff that he showed early on in the year. All right, so your first team, we only had one guy overlap. My second team, your first team, will have some people that are overlapping.
Okay.
But here are the 4 guys that are on my first team.
Here we go.
All right. So I'm going to go with Nikola Topic
Okay.
in one of my guard spots. I'm going to go with Reed Sheppard in one of my guard spots. We both had Dalton Connect in a forward spot. I'm going to go with a little wild card here, but I just really believe in his game. And again, we don't even know if this guy is going to come out based on reporting, but some of the reporting also maybe. So until there's a definitive no, I'm gonna go with this guy, and then who is Colin Murray Boyles.
Okay.
Shake things up a little bit. And then Donovan Clingan was my big man.
Okay. So from your first team, 3 of those guys are on my second team.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm guessing I know the 3.
Yes. I think so.
So Colin Murray Boyles is a guy that I've just been really, really high on since he returned from his bout with mono. He was a guy that I really liked coming into the year. I just didn't think that there was really much potential for him to be a one and done. And then he started playing and I started watching him and I was like, oh, he could totally be a one and done in this class. Like he was like producing like pretty much right away. And if you look at, a ton of the advanced metrics, he is like very, very good to excellent in a ton of the really important advanced metrics. He can really move defensively. He's a strong dude who I think has a lot of room to improve his body. Most certainly could go the other way too, but I think that, he's the type of guy that he's going to grow into his body and turn that into a real strength. Good length, good passing feel, good finisher, lefty. A guy that I can see playing next to a lot of the modern quote unquote big men that are in the league. I think you can put him next to Wemby and he'd fit really well. You can put him next to Chet. He'd fit really well. You can put him in a ton of scenarios, even if the shot never comes around, where he is not going to, be an antiquated archetype because right now the shot doesn't come around and he does a lot of his work near the basket. I think because he can, make plays out of the short roll and, he has this quick processing, he's going to be able to play in different lineups. And then I think in certain lineups, he can even go small ball a little bit. He's also one of the youngest prospects in the draft. So again, like you hear things that make you go, well, he might test. And by the time he tests and he gets into interviews or workouts, or maybe he goes to the combine and all of a sudden he's a guy that we're all talking about. I'm just going to choose to believe in him until it doesn't make sense to believe in him anymore. And he's a guy who's in my top 10. Because if you're telling me that all he needs to do is develop an outside shot, then fine. I'm willing to take that bet on a guy who does a ton of other things well. I wish the shot was there already. I wish maybe he was 2 inches taller. I wish he could dribble like Rob Dillingham. I wish a lot of things for these prospects that are imperfect. But I think as it stands, I know Colin Murray-Boyles is a guy that I can get into my system, develop him, and kind of figure out a way to make him a valuable piece of my team, because I think that he has a very strong baseline and a ton of upside because he has so much room to grow and expand his game.
So Corey, I only have one question.
Yeah.
So I actually totally get it. Like if Colin Murray-Boyles could shoot, he'd probably be the first pick in this class. I'm serious.
There'd be a chance.
Yeah, just because if he could shoot, like the other aspects of his game would shine even brighter. So there's that. But what was your rationale in having him first team? Just because I understand you're high on him, you have him top 10, but there are also a lot of other guys that I'm sure you kind of were, wrestling with in terms of having them over him first team. What was it that kind of pushed it over the edge for you and putting him on your first team?
Yeah, so like I don't have him top 5, which having him on your first team may kind of lead you to believe in some way, right? Like,
right.
But for Murray-Boyles, like a lot of the guys that are in my top 10, just the way it worked out positionally, he was the guy that I felt comfortable with putting him there. Now, I kind of considered Sarr a big. So Alex Sarr is the center on my second team. If I would have went with forward for Sarr, then he would have been on my first team because I do have Sarr ahead of Colin Murray-Boyles. So I guess, we could, in theory, since you went Sarr first team, I could flip-flop those guys and have Murray-Boyles on my second team. Because one of my forwards, I could put at center, technically, I think, on my second team. So I think that probably makes sense because I do have Sarr ahead of him. Like I have Sarr. I thought Sarr was so impressive in the playoffs with Perth because it showed that, he can kind of look like the guy who's knocking down 3-point shots and, dribbling from the perimeter and getting to the hoop and, all that stuff. But he could also play in a more scaled down role early on and do things that are like more conducive to winning if he, by any chance, got put into a scenario where he was on a team that was actually playing for something. Now, chances are he's going to be taken at the top of the draft. His team's going to suck and they're going to let him experiment. But that ability to play structured basketball is within him. And I thought he was really, really, really good. Even if he wasn't playing 25, 30 minutes a night in those games, the minutes he had, he was really effective. So if we're going to put Sarr as a forward, then I'm going to flip-flop and I will have Sarr on my first team.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
I'll have Colin
For
Murray
sure.
Boyles on my second team. But
Yeah.
I was considering Sarr as a big going into this.
Yeah. No, and as you should. I as I mentioned, I cheated. So I'm that, I kinda
Well,
did
Sarr
that.
has that the positional
Exactly.
fluidity.
That's the
Because
reason why I put him where I did. Yeah.
Because in theory, right, if you're like, oh, he's the unicorn guy, you want him to do the Evan Mobley, Chet Holmgren, whatever path, right? Ultimately, what we learn is that these guys are just better as centers and more effective in the NBA because they're able to leverage, the mismatch ability that they have a little bit better at those spots. But that doesn't mean that they're not effective in the forward spots, right? It just means to optimize certain lineups. I think, eventually they end up as centers. We saw what happened when Wembanyama went to center, right? Chet has been playing as a center the whole year. Mobley, I think he's better as the lone center. But playing with Jared Allen, you want to get both those guys on the floor. So you understand why they kind of put him there. But I think Sarr is going to be the same kind of guy that he could, in certain lineups, he will play with maybe another stronger, more drop heavy center, and he can kind of be out on the perimeter. And then other times they'll go quote unquote small, even though he's like 7 feet tall, and he'll be the center. So, but I'm going to add him to my forward list since you did.
Sure.
So that would make Klingon, Sarr, Connect, Reed, Sheppard, and Topic my first team.
Klingon, Sarr, Connect, Topic, Reed, Sheppard. Okay. Topic was the hard one for me. He was the one that I really, really wanted to put on my first team. Only reason why I didn't is we haven't seen him play in a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't mean that as to like slight him as a prospect. It's just I thought it was only fair to have a guy like Castle who had such a strong end to his season on my first team as well. But he's really good, and I'm really excited to see what he looks like on the NBA level. So he was the hardest one to keep off my first team, I think.
Castle was the hardest guy to keep off my first team. I guess you could say him and Sarr, but Castle, I have Castle one spot ahead of Sarr on my personal big board. So those two guys were really hard. And with Castle, I was like, I can probably cheat and put him as a forward. Because, he played a lot of off-ball kind of wing, right? Like, so I was also just contemplating going like a little smaller and having Connect and Castle as my first team forwards as well. That was definitely a thought that I had because I freaking love Castle, man. Like that dude, I'm telling you, when I saw him in the Big East tournament, because the first time I went to see UConn this year, he was hurt. So when I went to see him in the Big East tournament, he had a possession where he rotated over and volleyball spiked a block, like a layup attempt, and then got UConn out in transition. He was running the wing, and I forgot who threw it. Someone threw him an alley-oop, and it was a terrible pass. And he almost caught it and threw it down. And I got up in the media section, which the media section I was in at Madison Square Garden is on the Chase Bridge, which if you've never been to Madison Square Garden, it's like this, I guess it's very high up. It's like by the banners. It's by the banners, but not like it's like above and over, like the main seating. And I got up in the row and like knocked over like a few of the rolly chairs, and I was the only guy standing up and viscerally reacting to it. But I was just like, oh, I've seen Jimmy Butler do that before. Like, and so, and I really think that he has so much more shot creation ability than he was able to show. But the fact that you're able to play in that system as a freshman and know it and understand it and get it and thrive in it, that like, all right, I could teach a dude like that to shoot a spot up jumper. His job is going to be learning how to shoot a spot up jumper. Like, I could figure that out, man. Like, but if he's going to be able to make back cuts and hit guys on back cuts and set screens off the ball and maybe set screens on the ball and then roll and then run ball screen and be this gadgety wing. And then, that's an awesome player. And that's not even taking into consideration that, hey, maybe that on-ball equity is still there. And all of a sudden he's a guy who is like going to go get you a bucket too. Like, I mean, the feel that he has when he's like in the paint and he spins off guys near the rim, like he rocks.
Corey, that's that last part that you just said, that is exactly why I put him on my first team, and he's the only guard on my first team, because I still see a world where the conversation that we had early on in the season about him maybe being, primary creator type one day, I think that glimmer of hope is still there. He played in a system for UConn, played a very specific role, played within himself, did a great job all season. I don't think that is a precursor to what the rest of his career looks like. I think it's great that he functioned in that system. He played his role to a T, did a great job playing off of guys, playing within that system, making quick reads, doing everything the coach asked him to do. And yet, I think we're just looking at the tip of the iceberg with the type of player that he could be. And so I wanted to hold on to that hope and hold on to that ceiling with him. And that's why I put him as the guard on my first team, because I'm right there with you, man. Like, he had an unbelievable end to the season, played extremely well, just terrifying defender. And yet there's still more to his game. And I want to see him tap more into that, see more of the playmaking, want to see him continue to develop as a shooter. And, so, yeah, once again, not because he was able to show a ton of that in his freshman season, but because I still believe that's in him. That's why he ended up on my first team.
Yeah, completely fair. And the more you talk about him, the more you're like, I could have had him on the first team. But I love Topic, man. Yeah, I still believe in Topic. I mean, he is, a legit 6'6", and that's probably without shoes. Wingspan, if you look on the internet, it says 7 feet. 7 feet. It's not, I've heard from teams that it's also 6'6". So, but if for a guard, completely fine. I think his shot looks like up top. All of the pieces are there for it to be good. He always, like every time he shoots, he's snake biting it. He's quickly pulling it away. He never holds his follow through. His base needs a little bit of work, but like he's a guy that I think is pretty comfortable shooting it off the bounce. And if you're confident enough and comfortable enough attempting them, I think teams are going to respect you enough to guard it a little bit closer than if you were just somebody who's just not taking them at all. And then two, I think you're going to give yourself reps to improve on it if you're actually shooting them to work on your weaknesses. He's another one, super, super young, one of the youngest prospects in this class. Did that in a real grown man league where guys are gigantic in that league. And he's doing that. He was near 70% finishing at the rim. And that's like in the half court too. Like, I think with the extra space and his ability to manipulate ball screens, I think he's going to be fine getting into the paint. Definitely is going to need to develop some kind of floater or some kind of mid-range pull-up. Yeah. Because that seems a little bit non-existent at the moment. And I think that's going to be an important thing to develop. Modern guard, like every modern guard has some kind of in-between shot. And that floater, we've seen a lot of guys be able to kind of toy with the drop defenders because you don't know if they're going to throw in the floater or lob it up for an alley-oop. Manuel Quickly is, really great at that. Trae Young, guys like that. And, Topic can develop that. I think that could be a really, really important shot for him as well. And he's big enough that, and I think he's going to have a fine frame, and he's not going to be somebody that you worry about, that you have to is going to get like mismatch hunted from like being at a size deficit, when you get into the playoffs. And I mean, he's just a speed demon in transition. Yep. Like he's able to weave in tight spaces so seamlessly. He can make every pass in the book. I mean, at his age, I'm going to bet on that still. I know it sucks that we haven't seen him in so long. Yeah. And hopefully he comes back and, we get to see him a little bit. I really wish we had more of a sample seeing him, in the Euro League, but alas, we didn't. But everything he showed me this season, I don't want to, just because we haven't watched him play live basketball in a while, I don't want to discount, I think, how impactful it felt coming from him early on.
Yeah. Corey, I think it's one of the things, like, I recently, when I read about Cody Williams, when I was talking about wings, right? Like, the NBA, we love wings, need them to work out, but you keep taking your bets there. With Topic, it's kind of a similar thing, where he's a guy that, with his baseline of skills, it's too enticing for you to not take a chance on that. Let's say the shooting never works out, like, that's a very real possibility, right? And yet still you have to take that shot, just because everything else is so strong with him, right? You mentioned he makes every play in the book, every pass in the book. He's got great size. He may even be 6'7" with shoes on. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
A guy who, when he can walk to the basket a lot of the times and finish through stuff. So, when we consider all that he has in his bag, it's one of those things where you would be making a mistake in not taking the chance, even though that it is you taking a chance. And that's, one of the smart things that I think front offices have to do, where even though there's a world where things don't work out, it would be a mistake for you to not at least try, for you to not at least take that initial bet and see what happens down the road. Because if it does work out and he ends up being a pretty good shooter and he develops that in-between game, then you're talking about a really high level point guard that could run your team for a long time. So right there with you, man. Once again, I wish he played more, but just the baseline of skills and the tape that we had was good enough to have him up there for me as well.
And, I circled back to a piece that Ignacio had written for NoCeilingsNBA.com, where he talks about, for the international prospects, like, how important production was to predicting, like, success in the league. Like, the more raw international prospects, like, typically don't work out, but the guys who have actually shown that they can produce even at a young age are the guys that do, and they go on and they kind of, in some ways, replicate the successes that they've had. And Topic is a guy who's had a really productive season, and it feels to me a little like the Şengün stuff, like, where that dude was killing it, and it was clear that he had this kind of deficiency to his game where he can't shoot, and if you can't shoot, or he wasn't shooting from three, and if you can't shoot now, people want to knock you down a peg. But it's like his strengths were so strong and the production was so legit that it's just like you had to believe that he was an outlier in a lot of ways. I believe that of Topic as well. So, I still have him as a top 2 guy on my board, and it's going to be hard. I don't see a world in which I don't think I would change that. There's no way he would slide beyond 3 for me, I guess, in this class.
Right there with you, man. Actually, I don't even remember where I have him right now. Let me take a quick look. I have him at 5.
Yeah.
So.
Well, yeah, the top 5. And I get it. There's a lot of prospects. I mean, we got a lot of Ron Holland stuff in the chat. People are still believers in Ron, right? So not me either. But I get it. But in this class, there are other bets I'm willing to take. And then Reed. I mean, look, I get it. He did not have a very good showing in the tournament, right? I just don't think you can overreact to it.
Yeah,
I just don't think you can, and you have to take the whole sample into account. You can use it as a data point, fine. You know who else sucked in their last college game? Franz Wagner.
He did. Was really bad.
Really bad. Really not good. He turned out fine. And I get it. They're not the same player. Franz is huge and, looks like the prototypical kind of NBA wing guy, and Reed doesn't in a lot of ways. But, I mean, we saw all year, Reed, the way he processes the game, the way that he could shoot the rock, the way that he fills up the stat sheet just about everywhere. I just think he's so good. I thought he was so good this year. I mean, his advanced stats were off the charts. I mean, the timing on his shot contests, his quick hands on defense. I think he's got the frame that he's going to fill out. We had a person in the league while we were at Hoop Summit tell us that, they went to see Kentucky at a certain point and they were surprised by how much bigger Reed and Rob were in person. And when he saw them on the floor and was standing close to them, and he was a pretty decent sized guy himself. So, I was like, all right, well, that sounds like a pretty good sign. I didn't see those guys in person this year, so seems good that he was pleasantly surprised in that. But I think he has on-ball equity. I think he could be a point guard. I think he could play off the ball. And I just think he's an unbelievable shooter. And if we're going to talk about how important it is to shoot, then I don't know, man, 50% from three over the course of an entire season, pretty good.
Pretty damn good.
Pretty good. Right? So I had to have him on my first team as a guard. I just believe in his potential. I think Reed could be an all-star one day. I think it's obviously becoming an all-star is really hard in the NBA. There's so much talent, certainly not a given. I can't really say that there's a single player in this class that it's a given that they're going to be an all-star.
Yep.
I'm sure it'll happen for somebody, but I had to give it to Reed.
Okay. I'm right there with you. Had him on my second team. So
yeah. All right. So to recap, first team, I had Nikola Topic and Reed Sheppard, Dalton Connect. I went with Alex Sarr after talking to you, moving him to the forward spot. And then I had Donovan Clingan.
Sure.
You had Zack Edey. Alex Sarr.
Yep.
Dalton Connect. Stephen Castle. And Zachary Risacher.
That is correct.
Okay. So now, Albert Garbage Time Gims' second team is.
Here we go. So second team's a little weird as well. I have some guys that we've already talked about. So my second team center, I have Donovan Clingan from UConn. Had to have him on my team. At my two forward spots, I have. This is a really weird one, but I have Kyle Filipowski from Duke.
Okay.
At one of the spots. My other forward, I have Cody Williams from Colorado.
That was my initial two forwards.
Okay. And then my two guards, I have Reed Sheppard and Nikola Topic.
Okay.
Yeah. So this team feels more like a team than my first team. But a bunch of guys that I thought had to be mentioned, couldn't let them out of my second team, needed to be there. So that's my five.
Okay. So my second team, I have Stephen Castle.
Okay.
I have Rob Dillingham. I have Cody Williams. I had Filipowski as my forward, but now he is my center.
Still good.
And my other forward would be Colin Murray Boyles.
Nice.
Based on the flip-flop. But initially I had Filipowski and Cody Williams as my forwards. And, the Cody Williams draft stock swing from this whole year is kind of crazy. And because he started out, we were kind of like, Cody Williams was pretty rough over the summer.
Yep.
Was very quiet during Hoop Summit.
Yep.
And then he came out and he looked good and he looked big and he was shooting it well, even if it was on low volume, but he was finishing really well. And then he got hurt a couple of times, was dealing with a few different things, and he was just kind of non-existent, and you never want the guy who's being mocked like in the top three to be like, hey, how was player X today? And you're like, oh, pretty non-existent. Like, not good. Not the only prospect you could say that about, right? But ultimately, I think he's just a really big wing that has a bunch of skills. I still think he's a raw ball of clay. And I think I like his ability to adapt as a role player, if that's all he's ever going to be, a little bit more than some of the other guys. I think his floor, while I wouldn't say it's safe, I don't think he does things on the floor that are detrimental to your team.
Mm.
And like, I think, a guy like Holland, I get like when he's got it going, like, oh boy, like he can, hit tough step backs, and he's a monster in transition. And, he can come over and swat shots, and, you feel his imprint on the game, positive or negative. You feel the imprint at the very least. But I think when it's not going well, it's hurting your team. And it's like, I don't know how much he can dial back who he is. And I know that like he wasn't always like, shot creator, let's hope he turns into Jaylen Brown kind of guy. I know that, he was a guy who kind of made a lot of like the winning plays and the hustle stuff. And like he plays hard. Like there's no question about that. Right. But I think like now he went to the Ignite, high volume kind of shooter. I don't know. I feel like it's hard to go backwards and roll sometimes like that when you're a young player. Like, I don't think he's going to look at himself as a young guy and be like, I just want to be a role player. And so I went with Cody at the forward spot just because I still think that his potential long-term is intriguing. I'm trying to account the fact that he was banged up and playing on an ankle. And like, I know his team was talking about like, you don't know the extent of it. And he's fighting. He's really fighting through it. I like his finishing touch.
Yes.
Wish he rebounded more. That's the one thing. I really wish he rebounded more and made an effort to do that. And was a guy who was getting more kind of like impact defensive stats. But I think that I still want to buy into Cody, even though I am well aware that he's another guy that you can miss on.
Yeah, I just made, for me personally, Corey, I just made it a point to not have any of the G League Ignite guys on my teams. I thought they were terrible this season. That's just me. I thought with Holland, a lot of, if not all, his big games were in not super competitive games. With Holland, it hurts for me to say because heading into the season, I maybe was the highest on Holland out of anybody. He was a guy. Yeah, there was something about his energy and his spirit that I saw at Hoop Summit, and I was like, I really like this guy. And then he got to the G League Ignite, and as you mentioned, Corey, he was kind of in a ball dominant first option type of role, and it really just kind of did not work out at all. I think it's going to be really difficult for him to, as you mentioned, kind of regress, or not regress, but to kind of, rein that in a little bit and become a different type of player. But hey, if he figures it out, I'd be really happy for him because, as you mentioned, Corey, and as we talked about, like his effort is there. He's a guy that cares about, playing hard. It's just if I'm going off of what I saw this season at G League Ignite, I really did not like what I saw. And I also don't know if he's ever going to shoot it either. There are a couple times at Hoop Summit where I was like, oh, maybe he can, tighten some things here and there and it'll look better. But just, I don't know if that's going to happen either. But just overall with his play and how I've kind of soured on him as a prospect a little bit, I just couldn't have him on either of my teams. So, and to your Cody thing really quick. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think ultimately like all of the wings, like the prospect wings in this class might just kind of stink.
Yeah. Very, very possible.
So it's like arguing one over the other really could just be semantics at the end of the day. Like, and sometimes I like to look at it like this, where it's like, all right, well, this guy is the highest potential. He's got to be up there. And it's like, how many wings would you have to get past to finally draft a wing from the 2024 class if they were thrown into the pool with the 2023 class?
Yeah.
Like, at what point of the draft would the first wing really be taken? Like, I don't know. Like, maybe in the Jet spot. Maybe,
and that's my thing, Corey.
Maybe the Magic really like Jet.
It's no,
and
but
his
Corey, it's
shooting.
so funny that you brought up the Jet point because when we were talking about this in Portland, that was the name that I thought of, and I thought to myself, I wouldn't take any of these wings over Jet. Is how I personally feel, just because I think Jet is the best shooter out of all these wings. And I still think that his handle might be better than all these wings
Mhm.
too. And I was like, oh well, if I believe in the handle, and when I wrote my piece on him and did my video breakdowns of him, I was like, there's passing stuff here with Jet too.
Yeah.
So if I think he's got the best handle, he's the best shooter, and he can pass over these wings, I'll take him over all of them. Is kind of how I
Mhm.
still feel.
And like I think obviously some of the Cam Whitmore
Mm,
slide happened to be because of like his knees or whatever.
yeah.
But like there's a chance that like I don't know after 20 is the first spot that one of these wings is taken.
Yeah.
If you're just going off the last draft, so it's like, all right, like if you don't like a wing, I that's fine. Like they might just all stink,
Yeah.
which is kind of why I believe in Dalton Connect because I don't think Dalton's gonna stink. Like I think Dalton is like probably have the best case to like go earlier than some of these other wings, even if it would be later in a traditional draft.
Mhm, mhm. And Corey, when I did my Cody Williams piece, like I literally compared him to either Zach Wilson or Joe Burrow, where it's a thing
Right.
where he's either going to be dog shit or he might be pretty good or really good,
Yeah.
you know? And so it's straight up a coin flip in my mind with Cody, just because. And the only reason why I think I have Cody higher than the other wings is because when I watched him in person, like his touch is impeccable. Like
Mm.
anywhere on the floor, it just looked like just feathery touch when he was throwing the ball up. And so that was the main reason why. I mean, and also physically, I thought he's improved leaps and bounds. Like he's way bigger and stronger than he was in Portland when we saw him a year ago. So that's part of it too. But like you said, like I'm right there with you. He's a huge, huge question mark. I still have him really high on my board, but I also it's straight up a coin flip for me still. So
Yeah. And, I know that, again, there are Holland supporters. Like, No Lang One says Holland's not that much less athletic than Asar while being further ahead as a shooter. And, like, just straight up, he's not.
yeah.
And I know that's hard, but, like, Ron Holland this year shot 26.6% on catch and shoot jumpers. He was 27.2% on dribble jumpers. He was 28.6% on unguarded catch and shoot jumpers. Like, he can't shoot, but he shoots. Like, that's detrimental. Like, Cody's not going to play to his weaknesses as much as Ron was willing to. And I understand, like, the Ignite program had a lot of issues to the point that they shut that shit down.
Mm-hmm.
But, like, those shooting indicators are not good at all. And then you look at, like, him as a rim guy, right? 59.8% according to Synergy. But then you go to half court finishing, and he was 53% at the rim. So, like, he struggles finishing, and his main thing is that he's like a downhill attacker. And then he also can't shoot, and then he can't pass. So, like, it's just a tough sell for me. And I get
also,
if anybody wants to buy into it because he's a raw ball of clay. And when he's got it going, it looks really good. And for me, the argument is like, I thought Jaylen Brown's college film was trash. And he went to a team that developed him the proper way. And now he's a really good player. So, like, I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that Ron Holland cannot become a good player. He most certainly can. He's just got a real long path to get there, in my opinion.
And Corey, just if I can, I actually do think Asar is a lot more athletic than Holland is. I'm not saying Holland is not athletic, but also Holland is just not as fluid, doesn't move laterally as well as Asar did. And with Asar and Amen, both of them were just such great passers that I mean, just look at what Amen did this year for Houston, right? It wasn't the number one playing guy, but I mean, he essentially, like I said in Portland, like he essentially is like an elevated Josh Hart with the type of role that he's playing in, and he was really good in that role. So, if Ron can do that and turn into that type of player, good on him. But just this year's tape was really rough, really rough.
Yeah, it was. But so was a lot the tape
Yep.
overall this year was pretty rough. So, you know,
Yes.
it's all relative. We both had Filipowski.
Mhm.
I like Kyle Filipowski. I think he's good.
Yeah.
I liked him last year. I like him this year. I wish the shot was closer to 40% and that held. And you know what? I wish more that he was at a over 80% free throw shooter than he was a close to 40% 3-point shooter.
Yeah.
Because then you could at least have a little bit more faith. But I'm also an eye test guy. Sometimes you just got to be an eye test guy. And I think Filipowski's shot looks pretty.
Mhm.
It just it looks smooth. There are way, way, way worse scenarios to get a guy into your program, and that's the starting point if you're trying to get a guy to shoot it. So I think he's going to shoot it. That Duke team spacing was not good. I mean, Jared McCain, dead-eye shooter, but outside of that, I don't know. Tyrese Proctor, go ahead. Let it fly, bud. You know,
No,
Jeremy Roach, doing me a favor. Let that shit fly. You know, like Mark Mitchell, Ryan Young.
Woof. Yeah.
You know, like what are we like? I don't know. I think with more spacing, better players are going to get like better passers and get him open shots. I like Filipowski. I think that, you know, he is a much better defender on the perimeter than given credit for. I think he could play the 4. He can pass it a little bit. He's not going to change your franchise by himself, but I definitely think that, you know, he can be a starting level player at a certain point. So, and again, I don't necessarily think that outcome exists for a lot of the players in this draft in a likely scenario. So in this draft, I think, you know, for me, he's a pretty easy lottery guy.
Yeah. No, Corey, I mean, yeah, that's why you ended up on both of our second teams. Like Dirty Dancer saying in the comments, Flip is a boring role player. In the 2024 class, if you can get a boring role player in the lottery, you're doing yourself a good job. That's
you know what's fun sometimes?
Mm-hmm.
Boring.
That's right.
You know what I like to do sometimes?
Vanilla ice cream.
Saturday night, maybe not vanilla ice cream. Maybe, you know, look, some Spumoni ice cream from the Lake Oswego Creamery. Some ice cream, maybe a movie.
Yeah.
Shut the lights, dim them a little bit, not all the way.
Mm-hmm.
A little blanket. Harry Potter marathon. Could be boring to some people. To me, that shit rocks. It's a real roll in your week. Lets you recharge your batteries. Sometimes you need a roll. You need a roll guy on your team.
Yep. And for some teams, they're not looking to take the Cody Williams bet. They're not looking to take the freaking Ron Holland bet, and they just need a boring role player. And I think that's where maybe Filipowski comes in. He's a legit 7-footer guy that I think the shooting will continue to improve. 3-point percentage was up this year. Just free throw shooting went down a little bit. I think he was in the 60s to end the season, which hurts, but
not my favorite.
Yeah, not my favorite, but can improve just eye test wise. I'm right there with you. And a guy who competes, was productive in his 2 years in college. A guy who's going to play hard, has got a little bit of a nasty streak to him too. So yeah, if you get that guy in the lottery in this class, you're doing a pretty good job, just because there are way too many wild cards in this class and what ifs and question marks all over the place. So Filipowski is way more rock solid in terms of what his basement / ceiling might be. So I have no problem with that.
And look, I know that people are like, oh, he, DJ Burns bodied him. And it's like, I don't know. When else is he going to be in a scenario like that where he's got to guard a guy like that? When it's garbage time and like he's playing against Kenny Lofton, that's fine. I don't care. I don't need him banging in the post like that. I never thought that was the type of player that he really was meant to be. So hopefully you have a better option to defend that kind of player in the NBA. I think, ultimately most teams will. Okay. So then do we want to get into our awards before we touch on Hoop Summit?
Yeah. I think we can go through this part a little faster.
Yeah. And, for me, we didn't talk about Dillingham, who was on my second team, but he's the guy, he was my sixth man.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. And not a hard one either.
No. I mean, he is like, if you drew up sixth man of the year in a lab,
yep,
it's Rob Dillingham. And
15 off the bench.
I'm 44%, 45% from three, right? Like another guy who just absolutely lit the net on fire. Electric, a little bit of bounce, definitely got stronger from where he was last year with OTE to now. Like his body's developed a little bit. It's not going to shock me if he goes in the top three at all on draft night. And I think in this draft, there's a real argument for that because he's a guy that is super explosive that I believe has a chance to replicate how he scores in the NBA. And I definitely think the defensive current concerns are going to hold up. But if you're telling me that, baseline, he's probably just going to be a really good six man who goes and gets buckets but has upside for more. I think that's a guy that is a pretty easy sell to bet on in the long term.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. I had Dillingham as a six man, easy one. I can read you my others too.
Yeah.
Defensive player of the year was not even a conversation for me. Guy had averaged 3.6 stocks per game, shot 20% from three, and it does not matter. Just because he's so influential on defense, and that guy's Ryan Dunn from Virginia, just defensive weapon. I had to put him there for me.
Yeah.
And then my most improved, I had Dalton Connect, and the reason why is because he made a big jump in competition and somehow got better. I think the only percentage with him that went down was field goal percentage, but everything else was pretty much up. So I wanted to give him credit for that.
I also went Ryan Dunn for defensive player of the year. I still believe in him. I'm at some point going to be writing about Ryan Dunn, but specifically his jump shot.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then my most improved player was Devin Carter.
Okay. He was I consider that too.
Yeah. I think Dalton Connect, obviously, a great choice there, especially because of the jump in competition. I went with Devin Carter just because, he just, from the shooting to the way he rebounded and how much of a jump on that end, shouldering the offensive load as a scorer. Just another guy who just absolutely imposes his will and leaves an imprint on the game. So felt like rewarding a guy from the Big East here with that award.
Yeah. Right there with you, man.
Okay. Let's talk about the Nike Hoop Summit.
Ooh. Something to get excited about.
I know we kind of shit on the quality of this draft, probably not just today, but throughout the course of the year. As much as fun as we're having covering it, honestly, it might be the most fun we've had covering a draft, just because of how different everybody's opinions are. But I think that we all left the Nike Hoop Summit a little bit more optimistic about next year than we had when we left Nike Hoop Summit last year.
Yeah. I almost wonder, Corey, if we needed to go last year for us to really appreciate what we saw this year. And I'm really not trying to be mean. It's just after seeing this year's group at Nike Hoop Summit, all I could think about was like, wow, you guys are way better than the guys we saw last year. And it's not very close in terms of like the level of talent. But we had an incredible week. Saw some really, really great guys. Excited to talk about it.
Yeah. And, it's always cool when the No Ceilings crew gets to like meet up in person and hang out and talk shop and brainstorm. And, it was just a really, really fun week. So who were like some of your standout guys that you saw?
The more we talk about it, the more I think about it, the more I write about it. I'm pretty locked in on Dylan Harper. Yeah, I thought it was going to be Ace Bailey, and I'm still really enamored with him. I think they're almost like neck and neck for me, those two guys. And we'll talk about other guys as well. But just Dylan Harper, it was kind of like what we just talked about with Filipowski, Corey. It was like, he doesn't have the flashiest game, but he kind of made things go. He was kind of the engine, the metronome, a lot of different things for that team. Just crazy physical, crazy locked in, just competitive spirit at all times. Really tall for his position, good
Mhm.
length, great frame. I did not mind the jumper at all. Obviously, he's going to have to continue to work on it, but it's a really good place for him to start. I thought his finishing, the pace that he played with was really good. The savvy, the playmaking, the list goes on and on, man. Just like the biggest thing for me was that buy-in, that lock-in that he had in terms of like a spirit type of thing. I'm like, that's going to translate.
Yeah.
And the fact that he has a pedigree and the body, and just the IQ to go with that spirit, I can't even imagine what that's going to look like next year with Ace Bailey next to him. So I left Hoop Summit really thinking about the other names, and then like just being by myself on the plane coming home going, I think I'm in love with Dylan Harper.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to mention him first.
And it felt like he took the intensity up a notch when the game started, to where you're like, oh, the burst is a little burstier.
Yep.
Like, because he was finishing through guys in traffic in practice, and he was being physical and all that, and he was getting to his spots, but like there was an extra gear that he had when the game and the bright lights turned on.
Yeah.
And yeah, like I think at this point, because guys are so raw and there's so much more room for them to develop, like sometimes we do try to like fall in love with the guys who look like they have a little bit more room because they're more athletic or whatever, and like they're a little more raw. And Dylan, the fact that he's already so polished, you want to be like, oh, maybe he doesn't have as much potential as some of the other guys, but like I think he does. And he was awesome the whole week. I mean, great answers in the post-game press conference. Yeah. Like just he already feels like he's a pro. And like, obviously, his brother's a pro, his dad was a pro. Like this is a guy who understands what it means to be a pro. But yeah, he was unbelievable all week. Ace was also fantastic. And, he was a little jittery to start the game, but he was like amazing in practice. He was the guy who was talking the most. He was the loudest guy in the gym, the most vocal. Like he had those leadership qualities, brought the intensity, gave us like an aerial show every day. Just the dunks that he's able to do, his head is at the rim. Obviously like the tough shot making is insane. Now he's a guy that settles for those tough shots sometimes. And like you saw, like when he is a little jittery and he's settling for that stuff, like he threw an air ball up early in the game. He got it going in the second half when things started slowing down. And, he's more of like a guy who it could take a little bit of time, but like the payoff is going to be insane for a guy like him. Right. But he was fantastic as well. AJ Debonsa. Oh man.
Sick. Sick.
Whew.
Yeah.
Another year of high school. That kid can go.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Huge.
Gigantic. Corey, the biggest thing with Debonsa is like he could play in the NBA right now. I'm not saying he's going to average 20 points a game, but I think he could play in the NBA right now.
I would take him easily first overall.
Mm-hmm. Like it wouldn't even be a thought. Would not be a thought. No one is even challenging him if he was in this class right now. Do you want to share your comp for him? Because I think it's unbelievable.
What, T-Mac?
Yeah.
Is that what I gave him? T-Mac?
Yep. It's in there. It's very, very possible, dude.
Now, T-Mac had some playmaking stuff to him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an area of the game that AJ is going to have to develop for sure. But my goodness, like the ability to get to his spots and knock down shots. I mean, the athlete, like, and again, he's huge, man.
He's gigantic.
Gigantic. I think he was listed at 6'8", and we were like,
nope.
Oh.
It's a lie.
And again, like he's going back to high school next year. We're going to get to see him again next year.
Yeah. At
the 25 Hoop Summit. And then he's got to go to college. Like he's not going to be in the NBA for a while, and he's good. Yeah. And when the shots weren't falling, he was, trying to get to the free throw line in the game early on. Yeah. And then in the post-game press conference, like there was a reporter from Jersey there who was asking a lot of like Rutgers
Yeah.
centric questions. And he had asked Dylan the question, and he asked AJ, like, because Dylan was guarding AJ at certain points, and it was basically like you great players guarding each other, and AJ was like, yeah, like I want smoke with everybody. Like that was kind of his response, like bring it on, like whoever wants to line up. He said great players guard great players. Like he was crazy.
He was he gave great answers, but he was also hilarious with some of his answers. Just
a little immature.
Little immature, but I like that.
He's a high school kid.
We had no ceilings. We still joke like that. So
yeah,
it was great. But just all week long. And Corey, I think the biggest thing is like, you know what, Corey? I didn't even care about the game as much for any of these guys. Like watching them in practice all week was incredible. AJ was awesome all week. Ace was constant communicator, so locked in on both ends of the floor, holding himself responsible and accountable the whole time, trying to keep his teammates engaged at all times, trying to get them to talk. Was just great stuff. Ace and AJ are both guys that I think if everything clicks for those guys, they could be MVP candidates one day. Is where my head is at for both those two. Just because the offensive ceiling for those two is unbelievable. And they're both gigantic. So
they are both gigantic. What about our friend Ul Chomchi?
The announcer at the Moda Center really was going through some stuff that night. Could not pronounce anybody's name. He called Nolan Traore like Nolan Charlie or something. It was pretty rough. But
maybe we don't know how to pronounce anyone's name. Think of that.
Yeah, maybe. But with Chomchi, really just not impressed at all. Personally, I thought, at least in practices, we talked a lot about how he's almost mute, wasn't talking much. I don't know. Maybe if there was a language barrier thing, I'm not sure. So do want to give him a little bit of benefit of the doubt there. But just Malik kind of bullied him at times, even in practices and scrimmages and stuff. Yeah. And with Chomchi, although he had that really nice live dribble bounce pass in the game, that was nice to see. But overall, like just super duper raw. Guy that's going to need a lot of time that I think we were not even expecting to, declare for the draft after, the week that he had. But also, in the game wasn't super active on the boards. I thought just a lot of stuff lacking. But you can understand, like, if there was going to be a year for a guy who's raw and not ready to declare for the draft, it's probably this one. So,
yeah, I mean, look, if somebody takes him in the first round over a player who's probably going to stink, like, fine.
Sure.
Like maybe they both stink, but at least this guy, you could talk yourself into the upside. My big thing is, and the measurement situation was weird because the first day they came out with measurements and guys were like whatever height they were listed at. And then the next day they redid the measurements and everybody was 2 inches taller except for Malik, because I guess they're like, well, we can't lie about him being 2 inches taller because then he would be 7'3". And that seems unreasonable. If he's 6'9", that is a way different thing than if he's 6'11" and raw. Like I think like there's a little Bobby Porter-ish stuff to him. Bobby Portis, rather. Sorry. The shot looks smooth. It looks like he's going to be able to shoot it. He just was very inconsistent shooting it in drills, very mechanical, as smooth as it looks like he's thinking about shooting it. I did like, that pass, and some of the passes from the practices were nice. Like he had a couple of moments as a rim protector where he got off his feet quick. I thought he moved out really well on the perimeter, closing out. I thought he set pretty good screens, and he would like screen, rescreen. He'd make contact. I thought he was better in the game, at least to start, than he was, in some practices. But like, again, like he's very raw. And there were a lot of things that he's not ready to do. And, speaking with people in the league, they were like, glad we got to see him because now we know he's not ready for sure.
Right.
but he declared. So he'll get in workouts, he'll do the thing and pre-draft, and somebody will draft him. And it's a fine bet in this draft. It just, I've seen people say some wild stuff online about him and his athleticism and how he moves and his potential and all this. And it's like, I don't know about all that. So like, we need to slow down and give this kid some grace and be patient with him, because just because someone's raw doesn't mean that they have like the potential to be, an all NBA guy one day. I don't think he's anywhere near that conversation, but he will get drafted this year, I'm sure.
Corey, I thought Malik was raw. And
he was raw.
And
he looked good in the practices.
Exactly. And I think Chomchi's more raw than Malik.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of speaks for itself. So
yeah. And I like Malik. I think, as raw as he is, he's
gigantic,
long, thick, can shoot like, like he can really, his stroke was pretty smooth. Like, if you're going to, he's not in this draft, but like, for me, that's a kind of raw prospect that you swing on, because the payoff for that guy is like, could be crazy. But, again, like this week, you never know. Like, we saw a lot of guys last year at Hoop Summit who we were like, and then all of a sudden they're being mocked at number 1 today on the draft. And we saw guys that were like, and all of a sudden they're in our top 10s. And so you never know.
Yeah.
But where we're at right now today, both those guys are pretty raw.
Yeah. Pretty raw.
Traore, though. Yeah. That kid.
Corey, you know what I was thinking this morning? I wonder if that kid has a shot to play in Paris this summer.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how that works.
I hope he does, because Victor might like playing with him.
Yeah, he's good. He's good, man. He reminded me of like what people are trying to talk themselves into with Tyrese Proctor. But like he seems like he's got a shot to be that. He hit like a sidestep 3. He was diming people up, and the ball placement on those passes to spots where guys could not get like intercepted. And like, he was awesome. Like, getting into the paint, couple of crazy finishes. Like, that guy puts on some strength and continues to like hone in on his shot. Like, that kid is going to be a problem. His feel's off the charts. VJ Edgecombe said he's the best point guard he's ever played with.
The touch, the timing, the anticipation, the pace of all his passing and ball screen work was just it's just magical stuff. Yeah, the processing speed that he had. Corey, he had this touch pass where you and I looked at each other and we're like, what the hell did we just see? Was unbelievable. In practices and workouts throughout the week, he was really shooting the ball too. Nice looking jumper, and he's big. He's really big. I think 6'5", 6'6" type of big. So I think he's got a really, really bright future.
And I think the coaches kind of speaking highly of him, right?
Yeah. Spoke to one of the coaches, gave me a call yesterday and was like, he's the goods. So
yeah. And obviously, Cooper Flagg, terrific. Everything he's billed as, he is, absolutely going to be a monster defensively. Offensively, he did everything you could have asked for him. His feel's off the charts. He plays the game. And he doesn't break out of the offense to go get his. Like, he just plays within the flow. Like, he's the truth. Like, number 1 guy on my board right now. I think people are gonna put Ace there maybe to start the year. Like, just I think that's how the internet works. Like, some people are gonna have him there, and I get it. But Cooper is just gonna be such an impact guy. I don't know what position he is. He's just a basketball player, and he's awesome. And this is, I've seen him multiple times before this. I'm going to see him on Sunday. I'm going to the Jordan I'll be at the Jordan Brand Classic. So I'm going to see a bunch of these guys again. But yeah, Cooper Flag, the truth.
Corey, whether it's Cooper, Ace, Harper, Traore, whatever, like the list goes on and on, AJ, the level of buy-in compared to last year was like a different level. Like last year, a lot of these guys, and we won't name names, but a lot of guys in last year's class during the Hoop Summit, they really treated it like an all-star game, like an exhibition. We saw some posture stuff during practices and scrimmages that, were not great. And then in the game, it kind of, was the same thing. They didn't take it super seriously at times, whatever.
And this year.
This year was so different.
It was this year too. Like that.
The
way they were in practice was how their seasons went.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. But this year's class, they cared during practices, they competed, attentive during coaching and instruction, and then in the game they were playing really hard and locked in, and so
it
was great.
And then last guy, I think I want to touch on VJ Edgecombe.
Yeah,
thought was really, really good the whole week. Again, he's a guy. He played at Long Island Lutheran, which is in my neck of the woods. So I've seen him a bunch, and I wrote about him last year for NoCeilingsNBA.com. And I've been telling the guys about what his athleticism is like in person, and I think after that alley-oop in the scrimmage that he caught, that was just like the worst pass imaginable, and he was just in the air forever and made this insane recovery out. And we all just looked at each other like, what on earth? How does somebody jump like that? Like, his hang time is absurd. Like when he's on the floor, he looks like the guy you would cast to play Michael Jordan at Laney High in a made for TV movie. Like, that's the way he carries himself. It's the way he looks. It's the way he is as an athlete. And he was knocking down shots, and all week, he was very inconsistent with his shooting in the actual game. But, I think his footwork and his balance and his base need some work. I think up top, it all looks pretty good, but I think he's a little too upright, and I think he's got to, make some tweaks to his base. But as a shooter, I think he'll get there. But the burst, he was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, Corey, that alley-oop, I watched the slow motion of that alley-oop, Corey, and I, from what I saw in the slow motion video of it, I think it was tipped by the defender, and I think that's why it was even worse. And that's why like the trajectory was all weird, but just an unbelievable athletic play, and coaches raved about him all week long. They loved how he was with the team and with his teammates and stuff. So just a really exciting guy, and also for him to end up in Baylor under Coach Drew. Watch out. Let's see what this kid becomes and what he plays like in his freshman season. I think it's gonna be unbelievable. Before we wrap up, Corey, the one name that I wanted to mention, Asa Newell, a guy that I really impressed me. Just the shooting stroke looks so buttery nice, and he's like a legit 6'9" Didn't really rebound much during the week, and then in the game had 10 of them. Was really locked in the game and did a great job cleaning up the boards. Yeah, pogo stick, easy leaper, good size, good shooter. I think for him, lefty, if he was a little bit more aggressive, I think his ceiling would be even higher. It's just, I think right now it's a personality thing where he is a little bit laid back, a little bit, not like an alpha-ish type of thing, but things could change. Who knows what type of confidence can be instilled in him in college. So just, toolsy, gigantic, athletic, smooth jumper. So.
Yeah. And I saw him 2 months ago against Lehigh. They played at Hofstra, and he was amazing in that game too. Like very eye-opening. Like, he's just a guy who pops. For anybody who hasn't watched him, he's similar to like Tyler Smith in this draft, who's like a big lefty shooter, who's like athletic and can catch lobs and hopefully defend multiple positions. So yeah, good call out there. There were a lot of impressive players on the floor. There were a lot of guys who maybe struggled during the week who are going to go on and be good, and have good careers still. So I'm excited to see a lot of them again on Sunday. We'll have, there'll be some new faces there, some that I've seen, some that I haven't. So I'm excited about that too. The 2025 class is going to be great. It's really going to be great.
Excited for it.
Yeah. But we still have a lot of time on the 2024 class before we wrap that up. So I think that's going to wrap up our episode. Broke down our teams. We talked about the Hoop Summit for the 2024 Hoop Summit for the first time on a podcast. Plenty more where that came from, everyone. I just finished editing the Hoop Summit vlog, so that'll be up on our YouTube pretty soon. If you're watching this live, it'll probably be on the YouTube tomorrow. If you are listening to this on the podcast feed, it'll either be up now or it'll be up in the next couple hours. So it's like just takes you through our trip, a little behind the scenes, some practice footage, what it's like when the No Ceilings guys are doing stuff, at the headquarters that we had, all the restaurants and the food that we ate at. We ate good. So it's a fun little time. And also, shout out to the Blazers and all the people there. Got to see the Rockets and the Blazers game on Friday. Scoot looked tremendous. He's going to be just fine, everyone.
It's going to be okay.
All right. Albert, tell the people on the World Wide Web where they can find you.
You can find me at Alberto Gim on Twitter is where you can find me, at GTGNBA on Instagram. We have a lot of really exciting things coming. As always, I'm wearing and styled by a bit .nyc. Kevin Park on Instagram is who styles me for these pods. And yeah, man, Corey, we have a lot of really exciting things coming in the next couple of weeks. So stay locked in with us, guys. As
Absolutely.
We're gonna have some fun.
Yes, sir. Thank you, everybody for watching and rocking with us live and participating in the chat. We love you all. If you haven't yet, subscribe and like if you're watching, and if you're listening to this, subscribe and rate and review 5 stars. That would be sick. If you want to read more of the Hoop Summit coverage in more written form, from Tyler and Tyler as well, we covered the Hoop Summit. We put up a bunch of articles for No Ceilings Plus, so you can head to NoCeilingsNBA.com and subscribe and become a Plus member, where you get access to our private Discord, and we're gonna have some like video chats with our Plus subscribers pretty soon, and it's going to be really fun next 2 months. And, so definitely head there. There's a lot of great written work has been going up on the site as well. So, man, just lock in, because like Albert said, we're past March Madness and it's go time now. We got about 2 months till draft day. So a lot of good stuff coming. Thank you, everybody, for watching. We will be back next week. Make sure that you tune in tomorrow for Tyler and Tyler. I'm sure they will also be talking about their Hoop Summit experience in some form or fashion. So until next time, we're out, everybody. Peace.
Peace.